Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I would just like to wait a minute or two to allow everybody to log in. Welcome to our webinar. We are proud to present to you VMI 2.0, using stored data to push the boundaries of collaboration. The webinar will last around 45 minutes. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box on the right of the screen and we will answer them at the end. As Sales Director for the EMEA region, Philippe is passionate about VMI. His dealings with key players in FMCG, retail, manufacturing have given him a keen insight into how things could be done differently and improved. In the webinar, Philippe will explain the benefits of this new collaborative model. As Functional Project Manager, Dirk has a strong track record in supply chain, stretching back 20 years. These days, he brings the benefits of his expertise to customers. In the webinar, Dirk will share his hands-on experience of implementing collaborative management practices. Okay, now I will hand it over to Philippe to get us started. Over to you, Philippe.
Hello and thank you, Robert. Hi, Dirk. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. During the next 45 minutes, we'll be talking about the next generation of VMI, or what we call Advanced Collaborative Replenishment. That is store-driven replenishment. More specifically, we'll go through a stepwise approach. So basically, we'll start with explaining how this concept very much builds on and completes the traditional VMI process. Then we'll move on to explaining what is the underlying philosophy we at True Commerce Data Alliance have when we further enhance our solution. We'll also, of course, explain the benefits it is bringing today as we're speaking to our customers and their distributors. Then we'll move on to also honestly admitting the remaining pains that all of the above is not completely solved yet. So simply put, the reasons why we have developed, or we are walking down the store-driven replenishment path, and what is enabling this path. Then what I guess you're all waiting for, we'll dive into the solution itself, its main principle, and the way we took before delivering what we think is a high performance and highly innovative concept that is operational today as we're speaking. And then I'll swear it's going to be very, very short, a couple of words about True Commerce Data Alliance as a company. Now, actually, already talking about who we are as a company, this is our objective and our vision, what you can see now on our screen, and this remains very much valid, whether we're talking about traditional vendor-managed inventory or store-driven replenishment. Basically, what we still want to achieve is, thanks through our advanced collaborative replenishment solution, we want to help to enhance collaboration between suppliers and distribution partners to improve both supply chain KPIs and bottom line, and this regardless of the sophistication of the process you are able to run around VMI with your own partners. Now, going back to what VMI is, essentially, as you know, it is the process where the supplier generates orders based on mutually agreed objectives and demand information sent by the customer. Now, it is a pretty straightforward process, and yet it is very powerful in that it flips the normal of those things. So now beyond this definition, maybe we could have a look at the traditional data flow. This will help us understanding how this new store-driven replenishment concept differentiates from the past and builds on it, as I said. Dirk, maybe you want to help us identify the data flow in itself that is being displayed now?
Absolutely. So through commerce sitting in the middle between a distributor and a supplier, we obviously need to be fed with the supplier product catalog. And once that is done, we would expect to receive a daily inventory report for each distributor warehouse that we are going to replenish. The inventory report will contain a snapshot picture of current stock levels, in transit stock towards this location, and the consumption of the day. The input of this daily file will allow TrueCommerce to create and calculate an optimal suggested order, which can be reviewed by the VMI planner. And upon acceptance or after tweaking it a bit, he can confirm the order and emit EDI messages towards his own supplier system and also to the distributor. And then again, the supplier system can do internal checks and send out purchase order acknowledgements. So in this traditional scenario, you realize we only get one distributor file, and it contains sales data of the past. That's it.
Thanks, Doug. Now, what we see here, again, whether it's traditional VMI or store-driven replenishment, it's very much about distribution partners or trading partners tightly collaborating together, exchanging data with a trusted advisor that there's TrueCommerce Dessalines sitting in the middle and making sure that this data is qualitative and properly leveraged, interacting with the staff on both sides and delivering clear advantages. So the good news is that we seem to hear from the market and from our customers and distributors that this is very much the way they want to go. And we also hear this from the relevant recognized analysts. So quoting Gartner here, what they say is that in order to tackle the future challenges, there will be a need to explore more collaborative methods for working with partners across your supply chain networks, as well as connecting to your supplier and customers. Identify processes and systems is a thing to do to allow close integration to elevate customer service metrics. So that's pretty good news, again, both for VMI and advanced collaborative replenishment or store-driven replenishment. It's very much what this is all about. Now, you may remember that during the introduction, I mentioned TrueCommerce Dessalines' underlying philosophy or the approach we take to our solution and enhancing it. Well, simply put, it's mostly about collecting, sharing, and leveraging as much quality data as possible along the whole supply chain. It's very much the way we bring benefits, and we keep on bringing benefits to our customers. So again, maybe a good way to look at this is to look at what data sets both parties normally use in a replenishment perspective, and then see how store-driven replenishment goes one step further. Dirk, I need your expertise again to help me identify those data sets. So that will be the, I would say, the traditional data flow and data sources that feed the VMI process, correct?
Indeed. So on the distributor side, sitting on the inventory report, we have the snapshot situation of the distributor locations or warehouses. But additionally, especially in CPG environments, promotion is heavily driving the replenishment. So we also have capability to pull in promotions being sent over from a distributor. Supplier information that we need is, of course, the product identification. When we're thinking of product life cycle, we try to integrate what product is currently shipping and when the next one will become so. We also need to include the supplier's network configuration, meaning which are the ship from warehouses, what are the lead time parameters, And then, of course, a supplier on his side can also drive promotions, but essentially will try to optimize logistics costs by imposing minimum pack sizes. For instance, items would be preferably shipped in full pallets, or if they're slower runner products, they might ship in a layer or even just a carton. Okay, so this is just the basic data. And if we go to the next slide,
sure.
yeah.
Still doing my job here. I need to say that this is still the data set that probably 90% of our customers are using today, and they see advantages both in terms of lowering their supply chain costs and increasing their market share. Now, looking at the new data flows we want to leverage, and
yep.
you should see them. You should see them in yellow, orange on your screens now.
Yep, indeed. So following technological evolutions on the supplier side, we've, for instance, recently we've built capability to integrate real-time available to promise checks from our VMI tool straight into the supplier's ERP system. Something we've been doing for a longer time now, almost 5 years, is to optimize truck fill rates by pulling EDI orders sitting in the supplier's ERP, by pulling those onto the VMI platform and consolidating them with the VMI orders suggested out of the tool. But these things on the supplier side are not really the things we want to talk about today. What we really want to focus on is on the distributor side of the slide. Namely, we want to build, or we have built, the ability to integrate store orders from the retailer's DCs, existing store orders, but more importantly, we also want to tap into future transfer orders that a distributor is becoming capable to predict.
Thanks, Doug. Talking about the benefits again and drilling a little deeper into them, although we stay at a macro level, we're going to see the same kind of benefits we want to see with traditional VMI, only this will come at a lower cost and lower administration effort, and this will overall get increased. So we will collect more data, and overall we will increase the visibility, which will help us increase turns because we will keep less inventory, and at the end still increase the market share and therefore the sales. All of this data help us better predict what will be required at what time in which location. Therefore, the out-of-stock rates systematically drop. At the same time, because we collect more data and we cleanse this data and we leverage it, well, simply put, what comes out of the system just requires less rework. So you will be able to redirect your work towards more added value, but you will reduce the number of order touches or order reviews. This is the same with returns. If you get the right stuff at the right time at the right place, well, then you need to return less of it, of course. And finally, more sales. We just make it faster to move from the plan or from the DC down to the aisle of the shop or the wholesaler's location. So all of this culminates in better business relations, as we know. Now, as mentioned before, this works pretty well, but there are still things where we see room for improvement. In fact, we still see challenges today, and the main three challenges we believe matter to our customers, and we believe we can also impact through store-driven replenishment. The first thing, demand swings. We believe we could be more responsive, so faster in responding to demand swings, getting tighter to the end customer demand. Number two, out of stocks, at least for certain categories of products, remains stubbornly high. There is still work to do, so we make sure that we have less lost sales. Number three, and this, as we all know, has got a big impact on cost. Inventories, due to the fact that we're not as reactive as we'd like to be yet, due to the fact that we don't have the visibility we'd like to have down to the store level, inventory level are still higher than necessary. So that's why we wanted to get the VMI concept one or even two steps further, and move on to what we call VMI 2.0. And the great news is that retailers are very much driving the change. So taking a more active part into the replenishment process, even though it's supposed to be driven by the supplier. Dirk, you wanna say a word on what we see with retailers investing further into this relationship?
Yes, indeed. So as a solution provider, part of our job is to call on retailers together with our customers and to provide our insight on supply chain projects that these partners want to engage in. So as a first point, in Europe and as well as in the States, we see that retailers are investing in high performance forecasting tools. So in these conversations, some of the buzzwords we hear, and that may ring a bell to you, are point of sales data, machine learning capabilities, cannibalization, and halo effects. So what this all concretely boils down to is that retailers are building forecasts from store level up, and they will use this to drive their distribution network planning. On the second point, we hear that suppliers ought not always fill up empty truck space with the typical high runner products. You could take as an example baby diapers. Now, wouldn't you agree that this lightweight and bulky product makes it an ideal candidate for filling up empty truck space? Well, guess what? Some retailers really want to see no more than 4 days worth of supply on the shelf. So here again, we're encouraged to come up with different ways of filling trucks and encouraged to step away from our traditional truck filling logic. To point 3, even with all these developments going on at the retailer end of the supply chain, the supplier still has a lot of input to provide. All the value-added information available on his side, and which we talked about in the previous slides, still applies. So also you need to be aware it's through the efforts of the supplier cleansing all of the data that these VMI orders flow seamlessly between both the retailer and supplier systems without anybody having to touch or fix them.
Thanks, Dirk. So in a nutshell, we've seen the benefits of traditional VMI-based replenishment. We've seen the areas where we believe we still can improve, and we're seeing what active part of retailers are playing to that. Now, could we please move on to the solution itself, and you're up to a long straight line. And I believe we'll start with defining what the 2 main factors for change are. So what is really supporting the whole idea of advanced collaborative replenishment and store-driven replenishment.
Indeed. So the first key axis is that the demand signal we are working upon is changing from what has happened to what will happen. The second axis is that we still want to use the best of the combined retailer and supplier information and systems. So to the first point, up to now, the next replenishment calculation we would make out of our tool is mainly based on the historical demand of the past 6 to 12 weeks, depending on your configuration, of course. Now, the inevitable variability in demand is tackled by adding safety stock. And if you're lucky, it's correctly calculated using some statistics. But in most cases, we find that suppliers are simply overstocking the retailer's DC just to be on the safe side. So looking at historical data is not necessarily bad. The assumption that past demand is a good indicator for future demand still makes sense, especially in this CPG world, if you consider that VMI here works on a very short lead time horizon. So in Europe, it's almost always less than a week away from today. Now, this basic forecasting, looking at historical demand, is complemented or is to be complemented really with additional input in the heads of the VMI planners. For example, if they know of a demand peak or a demand slowdown is coming up. Now, in this context, my personal favorite illustration for the US is the recurring peak in yogurt sales that we see every year in January. And this phenomenon is simply explained by people feeling guilty about what they have been eating over the Christmas and New Year period, and they all massively go into these diet programs in January. Now, You could say that, or you could argue that you could calculate a seasonal forecast and look at the same period of the previous year. But even so, we think that in this case, an accurate forecast is not always guaranteed. Now, as an example here, you could think about product categories such as drinks and ice cream in Europe. Well, I think it's obvious to everyone that heat waves will not consistently occur every second week in the month of June. So I think it's fair to conclude that there are certain downsides when using historical demand to drive future replenishment. Now, what could be some of the answers? A part of the answer is really to look towards the future, to look at future demand. What is going to happen in the retailer's distribution chain? Now, with retailers investing in these forecasting tools, he's building the capability to create a future-looking forecast at the point of sale level. This forecast will take into account, for example, weather forecasts and their impact on product ranges. They will also take into account which particular stores are signing in on a promo. They could even take into account regional accents. For example, here in France, in May, the retired population of the country moves towards their summer houses at the coast. And guess what? We have seen and we have learned from our customer that this has a direct impact on the sales of foot care products. And also, if you remember the truck fill question, if we now have forward-looking forecasts, we would have a more accurate visibility to what retailers will want us to optimize truck space with. Now, if you think of all of this, wouldn't it be great if a supplier sitting outside of the customer's network could use this data that's essentially the same a retailer will exploit to execute his replenishment within his own network, meaning the replenishments that he will plan between his hub and spoke DCs and his stores. Now, Datelines, of course, is very eager to leverage this goldmine of information, and at first sight, using the point of sales forecast would be a perfect input into the VMI model. And the next slide here will learn you more about that assumption. So the assumption really is that we feed all of the scanned sales at the cash register of each individual store, and we configure all of this into data lines. So this slide really talks about one of the journeys that we've done with our suppliers, and it's worth talking about today because it provides insight in how we have found out what really is the best demand signal to integrate into our VMI tool. So we're looking here at a story that is an actual pilot that took place between supplier Kimberly-Clark in the United States and the retailer Target, and it actually ran for 4 months. I'm just going to go through what we actually did. So we started to use what in supply chain management theory at least is considered the best demand signal as far downstream as possible. So we would use the point of sales data coming out of each supermarket. So in step 1, we configured 40 independent supermarket stores or individual supermarket stores, all of which were being fed by one retailer distribution center. To all of these 40 stores, we applied a simplified stock holding strategy. Imagine 10 days of stock across the whole landscape. And then we started to receive and process daily product activity files containing stock and demand data for each of these 40 stores, but obviously also for the distributor DC, because essentially we were still trying to replenish or optimize replenishment between Kimberly-Clark and the Target DC. So how could we do this now? In the next step, in the step 2, we would try to calculate the consolidated pools on the DC coming from all of these 40 individual stores below it. So in the drawing here, all of the orange demand, for example, would be the most urgent transfers that have to go out over the next 3 days, because you understand that not each store will have a delivery made every day of the week, but some only on Mondays. Others might receive 2 replenishments. And then so green arrows would imply or would be calculated demands 1 day further out, and blue ones 2 days further out, for example. Now, for the final step, we have to move up the supply chain ladder, and we are looking at completing the ideal purchase order between Kimberly-Clark and Target. So what we would do here in this final step was look at the orange demand, which was the most needed, net the demand against all of the distributor stock that was available, and fill that in the truck. If the truck's not full, then we would look out and push the horizon to day +1 and day +2. So even the green demand and the blue demand would be a candidate to fill up the truck. So that's all of the idea and the theory we had behind this pilot. Now, of course, I think you would be curious to know how the pilot truly turned out. And let me spoil it to you. It didn't go really well. And for various reasons, that was the result. And I'm going to try and explain a few to you. And probably you already had some questions about the feasibility of the whole project. But here we go. So first practical problem. Imagine one store has stocked out on a particular item. Then of course our simulation would not derive any pulls on the DC. So we would not compute any transfers between that store and the higher level distribution center. But essentially customers would still want the product. So one downside. Now, the next practical issue. Just think about one person having to maintain data for 40 stores. You can imagine if new items are conveyed on the product activity file, they need to be detected, they need to be checked, and they would need some configuration to prime the forecast or to enter a minimum order point so that the system will indeed pull it. Very hard to do, and a lot of data maintenance for just one person who's even not sitting in the distributor's network and not getting all of the information of the terrain. A third downside is, of course, putting in place a single stock holding strategy of 10 days across all of the stores. Well, this would not account for regional differences or even product group differences. And then another one is thinking about promotions. The simulation we did not differentiate between what part of the stores would participate in a particular promotion and which stores would not. So we just had to make guesses. And then a concrete example in the true world of distribution. Imagine how sales would take off, or indeed we saw that some sales took off when a local store manager, decided to move products to a more visible shelf space in the shop, and of course forgot to warn the VMI planner about this action he had initiated. So quite some practical reasons why the pilot didn't turn out to be successful, but well, at least we did learn some lessons. So with all these shortcomings, we came to realize that a VMI planner who's not sitting in the customer's network, well, this person is not in the best position to use and maintain point of sales data and simulate future transfer needs from the retailer's point of view. So instead, we are counting on the retailer to provide us with the more accurate store order forecasts on their DCs, as it is the retailer who has more insider people that manage and maintain this level of data. So in essence, we can say that the input still is point of sales demand, but the hard data a VMI planner will act upon, namely the store order forecast, is at best produced by the retailer himself. Okay, so coming on to this next slide, we thought it might be helpful to walk you through a concrete, simplified example of the calculations for a specific supply situation. And we're doing this once using historical data, and in the next slide we'll do it again using this store order forecast data that we've been talking about. So in the traditional logic, what you can see is if we're today, we would look at the demand of the days past and make a smooth average forecast. And this forecast would feed into the order point calculations, which consists of a lead time demand of 3 days, say, and a safety stock demand. So the order point being 150, and with a supply situation of having 70 in the pipeline and in the warehouse, the required supply would be 80 units. And then the logic goes on and says, okay, these 80 must go into the truck at least, and if the truck's not full, we can look at what materials in the warehouse have lowest days of supply and put some more of those on the truck. Now, if we go over to the next slide, and we start to look at the store-driven replenishment, we essentially see here that what we're doing is substituting 3 lead time days times 25, so the 75 demand during the lead time. We are substituting this with the projected store orders within the lead time. So in this example, 120, the sum of 30, 40, and 50. So in this example, just before a sales peak, it's obvious that this results in a more accurate supply decision. And we're going to be forced to put 125 on the truck at least. Now, again, the difference with the previous situation, we're not going to look at what stock is sitting in the distributor's warehouse and see which one has the lowest days of supply. No, instead, we still have more forward-looking demand data, and we will just push out the horizon and fill up the truck with the demands required for day 4 and day 5 if need be. So I hope this concrete example makes it a bit more clear to you how our calculations would act upon this future store-driven demand.
Thanks, Doug. So we've been through the details of the first main change factor or change axis, that is moving from historical demand to planned replenishment towards real future store pools on the DC. Now on to the second main factor, maybe. And, well, I may spoil it myself. Quite simply, with this concept, we will use the best of the combined retailer and supplier systems and therefore information. Now, to have more insight into this, can you help us understand what this best or retail and supply systems is about?
Yes, so in the next slide, I think, well, we hope that with sharing our experience, you understand why we see that the retailer is the one that's best placed to provide the store order forecast or the transfers on their DCs. It will simply be more accurate. It will reflect the individual stock policies per individual store, and the data that is driving all of this forecast will be continuously updated in line with changes in the way the retailer organizes its distribution network. Data lines, of course, will keep on traveling alongside the suppliers to leverage the use of the best of their system info. So again, visibility available to promise information and the potential to tweak the suggested order in line with what really is available on the supplier's shelf. The ability to accurately order in the required pack sizes and even apply some advanced logic to consume excess stock when we're building these future looking orders. Also the use again of product transitions and replacements, the incorporation of promotions kicked off by the suppliers side, and making use of potential item stratifications, which would be a tool to deviate from standard calculations and standard stock holding policies for a particular product groups should the supplier decide to do that.
Okay, thanks, Doug. So we've covered the two main axes for change, as I said. First one, moving from past towards future, certified future. Second, exchanging more and better data from both sides. Talking about data, le nerf de la guerre, as we say in French. What data is required? Can you go through that too, please?
So in essence, the data that we are receiving in a traditional environment will stay, but additionally, we'd be looking for the retailers to send us per DC really the store orders that will be coming out of this DC in daily buckets for a horizon of say 7 to 10 days out, and preferably rolled up to the DC level that's going to supply into these supermarkets. But if need be, True Commerce Data Alliance also has the ability to take in individual store transfer orders and to consolidate them ourselves on the condition that in the file, of course, each store has an indication of what is the retailer's distribution center that is being its supply source. Yeah, and then of course the format is, as you know, typically in flat file or Edifact or EDI formats. We still try to be flexible on that. So that's it.
Thanks much, Dick. So we've seen, in a way, if I just comment on this, provided with some trust between supplier and distributor, the data set is very much available in most of the industries, at least in developed markets. So now, although we believe and hope you all have understood already what the benefits are, here's a little recap of what we are seeing so far with the customers who are already actively running this concept. The first one is that having demand signals that anticipate what will happen and what will surely happen between retailer DCs and stores yield 0.1 lower inventory, 0.2 lower out of stocks. And that's very much, remember, what we wanted to tackle at the beginning. Second, the best of retailer and supplier system delivers the best results. So meaning if you can get what retailer systems and information are best for, combining it with what suppliers are best for, and leverage this through a single platform that will be True Commerce Data Alliance, then you really have the best version of the truth ready to be shared transparently. Number three, I like the way it's formulated here. Yeah, for some retailers, having more influence in VMI orders is important. I'll put it differently. With this concept, we have made it possible for retailers who are highly knowledgeable to have a positive, active contribution into the VMI process, and so further increasing the efficiency and the performance of the partners along this process. Good. We're coming down to the end of the presentation. We have 5 minutes to go. So a little word on True Commerce Data Alliance, and then we'll be taking questions for the remaining 5 minutes, really. And the word, I'll stick to my promise. It's very, very short. There's something key we always want to state and restate. How do we differentiate from the other? Well, first, the amount of innovation we put into our solution is unequal in the world of collaborative replenishment. We have been doing this and only this as True Commerce Data Alliance for 27 years, and we have the largest workforce that is strictly dedicated to that, globally available around the clock, supporting our customers. Talking about customers, we count the largest corporations in different sectors, be it FMCG, of course, but also electrical, marketplace, plumbing, industrial at large. Second, and this may be the most important part of what we do, we have developed such an expertise that we can deliver tailor-made holistic support and services. Some talk about premium service. We do forever service at the highest level. We have people in-house that have been doing replenishment for decades, and they're specialized per sector, so they can really take our customers by the hand, facilitate and animate the benchmarking and monitoring of your performance with each single one of your trading partners. Last but not least, we have a quick, predictable, and scalable return on investment, replicable process, seamless, very little effort required on your side, so you can leverage and extend your collaborative replenishment footprint. Great. Well, now I suggest Robert, we move on to the next and final step.
Thank you, Philippe and Dirk. That made a lot of sense and gave us a good introduction into the benefits of collaboration. Now, we don't have long left, but I think we can answer most of the questions that have been submitted. So let's have a little look here. Yeah, the first question is, how can I convince my trading partner to move to the next step in SDR?
Well, I'll take that one. I'm back in already. There's a mix of good sense and support. The first one is that we as True Commerce Data Alliance, as just mentioned, actively invest into facilitating the relationship and the extension of your replenishment footprint with your trading partners. So we have tools in order to facilitate that before and while we enter into business collaboration. So we will actively support you in building the business case that you can further promote with your trading partners, so they enter into an advanced collaborative replenishment relationship with you. The next part of the answer is pretty much based on common sense. As for any relationship of that kind, you need to invest into a relationship that is strategic, both in terms of strategy, basically midterm, long-term strategy. Your objectives should be similar in a way and mutually beneficial. Point two, it should be investigated with a partner that presents clear areas of margin for improvement. And thirdly, I would say somebody who is technically available. You've seen it. We don't need crazy amounts of super sophisticated data, but we need minimal commitment so that we can build a sustainable process that you can rely on. Last but not least, trust. You really need to have a trusted relationship, and we see this more and more with the active involvement of distributors. So I would say that, again, combination of some data, some business sense, and some common sense makes it work.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. Is this a concept or is it already a reality?
I guess I can take this. This is Dirk. So concept or reality? Well, in the Benelux, it's live with a major retailer in the field. In France, it's foreseen to go live in 2019. We're actively involved in the design phase, so we give our input in the workshops between the retailer and our customer, the supplier. Over in the States, in Texas, there's a bigger retailer that's live on this system. And then lastly, the Kimberly-Clark Target pilot partners, they don't give up. They were part of the lessons learned, and they still believe in the concept, and so they're also working actively towards this store-driven demand sharing.
Thank you, Dirk. And then one last question. Do you see a difference in approach in the USA and Europe?
Dirk, that's definitely one for you.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't call it differences between the two continents. Well, we do see that retailers in the United States, they are more rigid in their planning approach. But having said that, there's also retailers in Europe that are quite the same. So to explain what I mean, for these retailers, when the day starts at 7 a.m., their plan for distribution execution is more or less crystallized, and it's also honored by all the players in the supply chain. So at 7 in the morning, the whole network really knows what's going to go out the door and what's going to come in each of the nodes in the network. And also this data before 7 a.m. is shared and is sitting in the True Commerce Datelines tool. This could be in contrast with other distributors that really at the beginning of the business day between 8 and 11 o'clock in the morning, they're going to debate and they're going to change the calculated plan of the day. So the information is obviously not going to be sitting in the VMI tool at 7 in the morning, and is not going to be to the profit of the VMI planner, who really has to kick out their orders around 10, 11 or noon in the day. So I guess to conclude, it's not dependent on the continent. It's really depending on how advanced or how centralized and how good the quality of the distribution plan is calculated and listened to. That would make one candidate better suitable than another one.
Brilliant, thank you, Dirk. Okay, I think that's all we have time for today. If we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, or if you have any further queries, we will follow up after the webinar, or you can speak to Philippe to discuss further. We'll be sending a webinar recording to all attendees in the next couple of days. If you want to watch the webinar again or share it with your colleagues, this email will also include a link to a short survey. We would like to request that you complete this survey to let us know how useful you feel today's webinar has been and how we can improve our webinars in the future. Lastly, if you'd like to contact us to find out any further information, this slide includes the contact information for each of our regional offices. All that remains for me to say is thank you for participating. We hope you enjoyed this session and learned how taking collaboration to the next level can improve your business. Thank you.